Okay, this isn't a normal PAC round of questions, so we're going to have very brief clarifications and questions from members. I ask them to be brief, and we're going to try and get through all the members. So I'll start with Deputy Cullinane.
I have two questions and two separate issues, and the first is in relation to the last time you were here, Mr. O'Brien. There was a conversation about the FOI requests from certain journalists, and specifically I think it was RTE who had tabled very extensive FOI requests. You had said in your response that if they had have made a more fulsome, I think it was, request in relation to local interaction between the HSE and the Gardaí at the time, then the response that they got back would have been different. It seems that they did make that request, and it was actually the HSE who wrote back to RTE to say that you need to limit the scope of your questions. So in the first instance, are you aware of that? And if that is the case, do you again need to correct the record of the Public Accounts Committee?
Thank you, Deputy. I think we have, in the interim period, provided the full dossier of all the correspondence. And there is one thing that I would like to make clear, because I think there may have been an ambiguity about it when we were here before. The coverage of the matter by the programme, that is to say the This Week programme that made the FOI request, was of course accurate in relation to its coverage. The issue that I referred to was other reportage, which included a headline on the RTE News website, which implied that there had been no contact at all.
Well, let's stick with the programme you just mentioned, because it's good that you've at least acknowledged that was accurate.
Well, we always did, actually.
And thank you for that. But in relation to the request that was made, are you accepting then that there was a request made by that programme for wider information, and that there was a response from the HSE to say that, well, listen, it would be better if you reduce the scope of the information that's being sought?
Well, without wishing to paraphrase the correspondence, and given that we've both seen the correspondence, it is clear that the FOI officer who dealt with it asked the requester to be more specific in terms of the request.
Okay, thank you for that.
And that included dates and the areas of the HSE that they wanted the information from. That is certainly the case, and the documentation which we provided makes that
Thank you for that. My second question, and one of the issues that was raised, was funding for the Waterford Intellectual Disability Association, which was one of the organisations that was providing care for Grace. Is that correct?
Chair, the question is not incorrect, but hitherto we have not sought to name that organisation for other reasons to do with legislative provisions that protect certain persons.
Okay, I think we'll move on and just ask the question.
Okay, but certainly there was a...
If we can have the discussion without naming the organisation.
So there was an organisation that was providing a service.
Yes.
And there was issues then in relation to... There were certainly allegations made by that organisation that their funding had been reduced because people within the organisation had made protected disclosures. You're at least aware that that was an accusation that they made. And
yes,
that's been refuted by the HSE, isn't that correct?
Actually, no. Sorry, I'll be clear what I'm saying no to. I'm aware of the allegation.
Yeah.
I have discussed the allegation with the organisation concerned, and indeed with this committee on a couple of occasions. Yeah. The HSE at corporate level has not refuted that allegation.
Okay.
What I have done is I have commissioned a review into two key aspects. One is the funding provided for the care of the person we refer to as Grace, and the other is the other aspects of the funding relationship between the HSE in that area and the organisation. And I've made a clear commitment that if that review indicates that there was unfair treatment, that would be put right and dealt with.
But has your organisation received a draft report from the Light?
The individuals who participated in the review, all individuals, including the service provider and the relevant officials, have been engaged in reviewing drafts.
Have you rejected any elements of the review? Has your organisation rejected any of the findings in the draft report which your staff, you say, has sight of? to your knowledge?
Well, what happens with these reviews, to be clear, is that the organisation carrying out the review goes through a due diligence process where it shares elements or the entirety of the document with the individuals concerned for their comments, fact check, accuracy, interpretation and so on. I am aware that the people carrying out the review, which as you know are Deloitte, are currently working through the responses that they've received in the period since the beginning of this month. As Commissioner, I have not received the report, and the only person on behalf of the HSE who could reject the report is the Commissioner. Individuals who are dealing with references to themselves can, of course, express their views about the accuracy or otherwise of what is being reflected in a draft report.
Two more quick questions. Are you aware, Mr. O'Brien, of any view having been expressed by anybody in the HSE to the funding organisation that they should fundraise to cover the costs of providing care for Grace because the funding that they required was not given?
Well, in fact, the question of funding for Grace has been dealt with by way of a High Court settlement mediated.
That's not the question I asked. The question I asked was, are you aware, was there ever a view expressed to your knowledge by anybody in your organisation that the funding organisation here, sorry, the organisation that was providing the service provider, that they should fundraise to provide the level of care that Grace needed because the money that they requested was not forthcoming?
I am aware from my discussions with the organisation concerned that it is their view that in the past, as they were in discussion about their requirements for funding, there was a question raised about the extent to which fundraising was supporting their organisation. I'm not aware of anything more recent than that.
Provide then this committee with any details of that, because if the organisation themselves are claiming that they, and my understanding is they say that their estimation of the cost of providing the service for Grace would have been €100,000. They were told by your organisation that would be €50,000. This was for one-on-one support for someone, now let's bear in mind, that has been neglected by the state in many people's eyes, and that they were then told, well, you should fundraise, you need to fundraise to cover the additional costs. Would you accept that that would be a very difficult situation for that service provider to find themselves in, but also very unfair given the history of this issue?
To be clear, in order to be fully informed on these matters, I commissioned Deloitte to carry out a review of both aspects. One is the funding that was actually provided in relation to Grace, and the other was the issue of whether the overall funding relationship was adversely affected or otherwise by the role played by the organisation.
And you told us when you were here last, Mr. O'Brien, that the Deloitte report would be published imminently. I think is the word you used. It has not been published. No. So what I'm trying to understand is there an attempt by your organisation at any level to frustrate the publication of that report by not agreeing with elements of it, holding it up, or whatever? Because if I'm being led to believe that your organisation has difficulty with many elements of it, that you believe it's gone beyond its terms of reference, but you may not be in a position to answer those questions today. But in any event, the report hasn't been published. If your organisation is not happy with elements of it, which is your right, but if it holds up the publication of the report, that would worry me. So what I'm saying, my question to you is that when you were here last, your view was that you expected a report to be published imminently. It has not been published. We are now being given information that your organisation has difficulty with many elements of it, and I'm just wondering then, is that what is holding up the actual publication of the report?
Okay, I need to just unpack that a little bit, if I may. It's important.
This is a pretty important question.
We need to be clear that there's a distinction between the HSE as an organisation and individuals who may work for the HSE whose actions or activities may be the subject of a review. Any individual whose activities are under question or review is, of course, entitled to reflect back to the reviewers, if they so choose, if there's an issue that they think is not correct, on a factual basis or a sequential basis or whatever it might be, is entitled to do that. If they have done so, that does not amount to the HSE having a problem with the report.
Are you saying so that in relation to the report and elements of the information within it, that individuals as opposed to the HSE or both are making requests or clarifications or for changes?
No, I'm answering the question.
Answer what I asked then as well.
Yeah,
A follow-up question to that, just before you come in, Mr. O'Brien, is that what I'm hearing from you is that the authors of the report may be engaging with some of those who are subject to the report. So there are people who work within the HSE who may be offered their opinion, and that's a matter for them. As a corporate body, and you are the accountable officer here, have you, at that level, and has your organisation at your level engaged with the light on this? And at your level, have you expressed concerns in relation to any elements of the draft report? Have you read the draft report in the first instance?
No, as the Commissioner, I would not read a draft report.
So you
neither would I receive a draft report.
Okay.
The body that has been commissioned by me will provide me with its final report. The only concern I've had in relation to the report is that it should be concluded.
But I want to be really just clear, and my very last point, I just want to be clear. Is it your contention then this morning that as a corporate body, the HSE has not criticised or has not found unacceptable elements of the draft report?
No. See, in law, the corporate functions of the HSE are vested in me.
Yeah.
I have not read the report.
Yeah.
I have not received and failed to read the report.
Yeah.
So corporately, the HSE has not expressed any opinion.
That's what I need to know.
The service providers, the persons with whom they dealt, their actions, their information, their submissions are at the core of the report, and all of those parties have been given an opportunity. And my understanding is that since the beginning of this month, the persons in Deloitte who are carrying out the review have been working their way through the responses. I did seek to put them under some pressure to complete their work within reason. Their advice to me is that they could not provide me with a report in time for today's meeting, which would have made my life somewhat easier if they had. I'm now advised that they're in the very final stages and that I should have it very soon.
Okay, and that's clear anyway. That's clear in terms of your.
In fairness, I think